This week in beginning Android development, we're going to take a look at retrieving data from the web. And for this, we're going to need to know two things. First of all, threading, and we'll use our friend async task for this. And secondly, how to interpret data from the web, like data in what we'll call JSON format. So first of all, what is threading? The concept of threading is the ability for the computer, or in this case the phone or the device, to do multiple tasks at once. Usually it appears that it's doing multiple tasks at once, but it's actually just chopping them up into bits and executing those bits in a sequence so that it appears that they're happening, more than one thing is happening at once. But where threading is really important is that if one thread is waiting on something, another thread can be working. So if we are typing something, there can be other threads in the background that are doing additional work. And I want to show a couple examples of this in the Plant Places mobile application. First of all, we have the color search here, and I've pulled up a picture of a plant. Now, talking over the network is generally an expensive thing for an application to do. It takes a lot of time. So when I click on a color, what's going to happen is it's going to retrieve plants that have that color. Okay, that is one network call that will take some time. After that, it's going to load the pictures from those plants, and that's another network call that will take some time. As a matter of fact, there's one call per picture. Now, in older versions of Android, you didn't have to thread, but if you didn't thread, your application would tend to lock up while it was doing multiple things. And then the trick is then if an application locks up, its user interface becomes unresponsive. People's natural tendency then is to keep clicking on that user interface, keep tapping buttons, which only makes the problem worse, because then the Android operating system believes that the application's not responding, and it thinks the program has crashed. So that's something we obviously it's not something that we want to do. In newer versions of the Android operating system, you have to do network operations on a separate thread. You have to. And threading's a bit, it's not very intuitive. It's a bit challenging for some people, which in a way is good news for us as software developers, because face it, anybody can make a web page. And for that reason, making web pages is something that's honestly pretty inexpensive at this point, because anybody can do it. Threading requires a lot more knowledge about how software works. It's not just like a web page where you're formatting data. Threading actually requires thoughts in processing and optimization and things like that. So it's kind of good for people in our field because it builds a barrier to entry for our career. So as I promised, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on one of these colors, and we're going to see we want quick response, so it won't take too long for the results screen to show. And this is on an emulator, which by nature is slow. Next, once it shows us the text results, it will come through on a second pass, and there we go, load the images. So you see, that was several separate threads running. One that would load the initial data with the labels, and then two that would come through and load the pictures. If we did not have this in a thread, we just would have seen a blank screen for that time, and there would be no UI interaction, which is very frustrating to users. Okay, and that's when they tend to tap and tap and tap, and that's when we then think that an application has locked up. But because they're separate threads, it's able to give the user a little bit of information quickly and then more information later. So that's the advantage of having a threaded program. One other thing in Plant Places Mobile where threads are used very frequently is in making a local copy of data. So if I go to the search screen, which let's say I'll try and pull up here in just a minute. Oh, that's right, I can't do that from this screen. One moment, and I'll pull it up. Okay, menu. Generally, applications that use threading are going to have a much more responsive feel to the users, just because they're able to interact with the user interface. What's even more important about threading is we give the user an opportunity sometimes to cancel a process that is running for an extended period. If you've ever had an application where you hit one button and then the entire UI locks up and you can't stop it, maybe you hit the button by mistake, you'll find that's very frustrating. So you hit a button by mistake, it does some long process that locks up, can't get out of that process. That can be very frustrating. If we have multiple threads, the benefit is that the UI is still responsive and we can still go in and cancel a task that might be long running. Okay, here's something that's a big use of threads in Plant Places Mobile. When you download the app, it starts with 0 data. But as you use the app, it makes a local copy of the data so that it can do things like autocomplete. So if I type in pawpaw, you'll see it will autocomplete and give me an option of common pawpaw. Or if I go back and let's say I type in maple, but I don't know what kind of maple I want, I type in maple and it will autocomplete as I'm typing. It looks like I might have typed a little too fast for it there. But it will autocomplete as I'm typing and give me a list of suggestions that match. Now, one of the guidelines is, let's see if I can try that again a little bit slower. MA. One of the guidelines is when we do, and you see as I type, it limits down this list. So when I type MAP, it limits down what we have. So one of the guidelines is that if we do an autocomplete, we should do it with local data, not remote data. And so what I want to do is I want to have a local copy of the data because if I were to do remote data, it would be very tricky because I would be going over the network all that time and that would tend to slow things down. So we see when I type this in here all the maples. When I download data, on the app, what will happen is a separate thread spawns and that thread will take that data and then save it locally onto the phone. Okay, so when I fetch data, when I search for data, what will happen is that as the data comes back, it will save locally on the phone so that I can have quicker access to it later. Even more importantly, I can have offline access to it if, say, when this is something I use very frequently. If I'm in another country, like if I'm in the United Kingdom, and I want to GPS plants, but I don't have cellular network coverage, then I can use that local copy of data to GPS plants. And that local copy is created because whenever I've searched for plants, it takes those plants and then copies it in a separate thread, which saves it to the phone. So those are some areas where we can use threading. If we look at our own app, we're going to need to do, if we look at the app we've been building so far this semester, we're going to need to do a little bit of refactoring. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go back to the home screen on our emulator and I will load up the app that we're creating now. And we know from the last time we were working on this that, let's see if we can find our app here just a moment. Okay, here we go, FS 1310. We know from the last time we were working on this app, what it will do is we have a menu now where we can go straight to search plants, and then we can type in some kind of search criteria, and it will return to us a list of plants that match those search criteria. The only challenge is that right now that's a hard-coded list. I think we're returning redbud and pawpaw no matter what the user actually enters. So what we want to do is we want to go against some live data. And I believe here, I have some live data that we will query against. It'll take just a moment for that to load. Okay, or actually, sorry, one second. I think I went to the wrong, this is what we want. Okay, it is close to this. One second. Okay, it was in a different browser window, but this is essentially what we want. If you see up here, I'm calling a URL, and I say common equals pine. If I say common equals pawpaw, we'll see we get one plant result. Okay, so we see some kind of interesting symbols around here. But what that's doing is that saying, you know, we can kind of read what this is. The ID is 82. The genus is Semina, species is Triloba, cultivar is blank, common name is common pawpaw. So we see there's some parsed data that we can work through here. If I say common equals apple, we'll see that we get a result of apple trees. So again, some common data that we can work through here to make our app. But the trick is that's going to require a network call to find the data. And in Android, in the operating system around version 4.0 and greater, if you do a network call, you must do it in a separate thread. Okay, so search plants. Uh-oh, I wonder if I have a breakpoint. Okay, sure enough, I had a breakpoint set, so I just had to undo that. So I can put in any name here. We'll go ahead and say pawpaw, for instance, and then search. And then what we're going to see is that we're always getting back basically a canned result. So we're going to have to chop this up. One trick with running multiple threads is that that usually indicates we're going to need multiple classes. So I'm going to go to Eclipse, and we are going to do what we call some refactoring. I'm going to hold down Control and press M. Actually, no, I don't want to do that yet. Let me Control M, and I want to change perspective to Java perspective. And the screen we were looking at is the plant results activity. So let me focus on that and Control M so we can focus on the plant results activity. Now, in Java programming and in any object-oriented programming, it's really a good idea to make sure that classes are doing very specific things and that we have tasks in very specific layers. In other words, user interface classes like activities should only be doing user interface work. We should have other classes that are doing things like DAO, okay, data access object, in other words, accessing data. If we look at this plant result activity, we see that it's creating this dummy data right here in this plant result activity. That's probably not a good idea. So what I'm going to do is highlight this area where we're making this array with some dummy data and making two dummy plants. I'm going to highlight that. I'm going to right click and say refactor and then extract method. This is a way we can take a unit of work and make a new method out of it. So we're going to call this fetch plants. We'll call it fetch plants. Okay? And okay. Now, I could have done that by hand, but what that did is that took all the logic that was here in this onCreate method and it changed it into a method call called fetch plants. And then it created a new method for me here and it pasted in all of the stuff I had highlighted. That's a big reason to use Eclipse, is it has some really nice refactoring tools like this. Now, one thing that's missing is I really should be passing in some kind of search term. I'm going to go ahead and save this. As it works out, there is a search term available to me, but I actually haven't been using it. So let's go to Control M and let's take a look at the plant search activity, and that's the activity that calls this results activity. Control M again, and we see that it is passing in an extra in the intent called associated with the name plant name, and that is the name of the plant. That is the name of the plant that we're searching on. So we should use that in our search result. So I'll remember, okay, location finder.plant name is the constant we're using here. I'm going to Control M. I'm going to go back to my result. Okay, and Control M again so we can focus on this. On the onCreate, what we'll do is we will put in some logic here that says get access to the search term that the user entered. Okay, so we'll say this dot get intent dot get extra. Actually, I think we can just directly call get string extra and pass in that name. Okay, so this dot get intent dot get string extra means I want to retrieve a value, which is a string, that was associated with this name and passed into this activity, okay? So in other words, another activity called this plant result activity through an intent. When it called this plant result activity through an intent, it passed a name value pair, or a key value pair if you prefer. The name, or the key, is this plant name, and the value, if we do Alt left arrow, the value is the search term that the user searched on, the plant name that the user entered. Okay, so so I want to retrieve that, and then I want to save that into a string. I'm going to hold, I'm going to hold Control and press 1, and say assign to new local variable, and we'll say string. We'll just call it search term equals this dot get intent dot get string extra blah blah blah. I'll save, and in a moment we'll walk through this in the debugger and make sure it makes perfect sense. Now what I want to do is I want to pass that search term to my fetch plants method, because when we go live we're going to need to enter a search term, and let me show you why. If we go to this results screen here that we're going to hook up to, you see common equals apple, common equals Paul. If I put in like Paul, common equals maple. Okay, each gives us different results. So when we go live, we're going to need to pass that search string in to get the results. Okay, so search term equals this dot get intent dot get string extra, like so. So what we're going to need to do then is pass the search term to our fetch method. Okay, search term. Now the problem is we're immediately going to get a red line, and we know the rule is when we get a red line we must when we get a red line we must fix it immediately. Okay, okay, looks like I went one step back there. 1 second. We're looking for okay. The reason we're getting a red line is notice that this method call no longer matches this method signature. Okay, method signature is access modifier, return type, method name, and then parameter list. The trick is this takes no parameters, but we're passing a parameter in. That won't work, and we'll get a red line until this method call matches this method signature. We could do it by hand, but luckily Eclipse will also do it for us. If I hold down Control and press 1, we will see change method fetch plants, add parameter string. And as soon as I do that, take a look down there. See that? Now they match. So Eclipse really wants to help us. Eclipse really wants to help us. And now we have our search term matched up. I'm going to go ahead and save, and I'm going to set several breakpoints, and then I'm going to turn this on debug. So we'll put this is in the search results, the plant results page. Put a couple breakpoints here. I'll also put a breakpoint in the search page itself, which, whoops, looks like I'm off a second here. Plant search activity. Okay, so I'm also going to put a breakpoint on the method that's going to get called when we want to search, when we hit the search button from the search screen. By the way, one note, when I was grading projects, a lot of people would set up a method to listen to a button click, and they would leave off the word public. That access modifier is very important. If you don't have it, chances are the button will not call that method. So I made that point when I was grading. That will result in a deduction from your grade because the project doesn't work properly. So just be sure, if you set up one of these methods that will be called by a button click, make sure that the signature looks exactly like this. The word public is an access modifier, void is the return type, whatever the method name is, and then the parameter list view v. So it has to look exactly like that. So in any case, we have it set up now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rebuild it, and then I am going to run it, and we should see that the results will be exactly the same. Right now, I just want to walk you through the steps of what we changed through the debugger. And again, that is another important point from when I was grading, is that a lot of people felt very stuck, I think, And my recommendation, if you're really feeling stuck, is to try the debugger, because you can actually watch the program run in the debugger, and that will save you a whole lot of time and a whole lot of frustration. So I'm going to go ahead and tell the emulator to run this, and as soon as it pushes and lights up, we'll take a look and walk through it. Luckily, it's being fairly responsive now, which is always good, and not necessarily always the case either. Now the emulator is loaded, so let's take a look, and we'll step through as our breakpoints hit. Okay, I hit search plants, and this is the part where it got a little bit stuck last time. Okay, I will type in a name, and remember the name that I'm typing in. Let's say I say persimmon. Again, remember this name because the idea is we want to take this name and pass it to the next activity. I hit search and our breakpoint should catch here. Okay, our breakpoint's catching. We'll give it a second to sync up. Okay, so string plant name equals act plant name.getText.toString. And what does that return? If you take a look in this box, we have the word persimmon. Now we're taking that word persimmon and we're associating it. If I mouse over, you can see the word persimmon again. We're associating the word persimmon with this constant plant name, okay? And then we're going to start the results activity. So I'll go ahead and say resume. In the results activity, now you'll see it's starting to render. And the results activity, what we need to do, remember, we're in a different activity, a different screen now. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to get the search text that was entered on the previous screen. So I choose F6, and I choose F6 again, and take a look at what's in search term, and once again, it's persimmon. Okay, so we've passed the text persimmon from one screen to another by using the get intent, by using the intent put extra, and then intent get string extra. Okay. So again, if we are here, we see get string extra, and we're associating it with this name, location finder.plant name, which is a constant. If we go to the previous screen, let me alt tab a couple times, or alt back arrow, we'll get to the previous screen. If we go to the previous screen, we see that we said put extra, and we associated persimmon, which is what I entered, with this plant name constant again. Okay, so that's how we pass data from one activity to another, with put extra and then get string extra if it's a string. If it's an int, it would be something like it int extra, something like that. Okay, now I'm on this method call for fetch plants. I'm on this method call for fetch plants, and that's the one where sorry, my dog is saying hello. That's the one that I refactored earlier. So I choose F5 because I want to step into this method. I choose F5 and we see all the logic we had previously is still here. It's just in a new method. And I step into that method by pressing F5, which is the step into key. If you're looking, if you're looking at Eclipse and debug, you see step into is this here, step over is this here. So step into, if we're on a method call, will allow us to literally step into that method and watch it execute. Okay, now everything else is the same as we had before, so I'll simply choose play, and we'll see that it will come up. We'll see that it will come up in our results. So that's a bit of refactoring. In the next session, we're going to talk about how we can put this into an async task and we can thread it up. And then after that, we'll take a look at how we can parse out JSON. Thank you.